The great hall of the Interstellar Council was filled with light and sound, yet beneath the shining walls and high pillars there was a sense of pride that carried a heavy weight. And in this place alien scholars gathered to speak of old legends of empires and of gods who once walked among the stars. They spoke of victories and defeats. They spoke of wonders and mysteries. But when the name of humanity was mentioned, a wave of laughter moved across the chamber, and the elders shook their heads with scorn. Humanity, they said, was a story made for children, a tale told by wandering traders who wanted to amuse the young, a myth without truth and without place among the stars. And so the name of humans was dismissed with easy words and mocking smiles, and the hall soon returned to its usual talk of great wars and eternal wisdom. Yet among the listeners was one young researcher, her skin pale and her eyes wide with curiosity. She was not satisfied with easy answers. She heard the laughter of her elders, and she felt the weight of silence that followed the name of humanity. And in that silence, she felt something strange, something hidden, something that begged to be uncovered. Her name was Lyra, and unlike the others, she could not push the thought aside. That night, when the council was dark and the great hall stood empty, she walked into the deep corridors of the archives. The walls were covered with glowing marks that told stories of old ages, but few dared to go so far, for the air was heavy and the lights burned low. She carried a single lamp, and her hands trembled as she touched the cold stone that held secrets older than her people. Her lamp revealed a sealed door, a door covered in dust and guarded by runes no one had read in many lifetimes. With slow hands, she brushed the dust away, and the runes seemed to glow at her touch. She whispered a word, and the door opened with a sound like breath after endless silence. Inside the chamber, she found scrolls and crystal tablets, each one marked with strange lines and symbols she did not know. But one thing caught her eyes, a word repeated again and again in the lost language of the ancients. The word was humanity. Her heart raced as she lifted a crystal tablet and placed it before the light. In the glass were marks of time millions of years old. She could not believe what she saw, for the record spoke of a species that walked worlds of fire and ice, a species that endured where others perished, a species that never yielded to fear. If humanity never existed, she asked herself, then who left these records, who carved their name in stone and crystal, who wrote of their journeys and their wars? She could feel her breath grow short as the silence in the chamber grew deeper. She returned to the hall the next day and tried to speak of what she found, but her words were drowned by laughter and denial. The elders said she had been tricked by shadows of forgotten tribes. They told her not to waste her time on childish myths. But when she closed her eyes, she saw again the word carved in crystal. She saw again the signs that spoke with the voice of truth. She knew she could not let it rest. She knew the silence was not natural. It was for silence, a silence shaped by fear and by power, and that silence only made her hunger grow. She would search further. She would walk where others feared to step. She would dig through dust and stone until she found the truth. Days later, Lyra left the city with a small group of friends. They followed her into the deserts of her world, where ancient ruins lay half buried beneath endless sand. The air was sharp and dry. The sun burned their skin, but they did not turn back, for the ruins called to them with voices that only Lyra seemed to hear. Among broken pillars and shattered walls, they uncovered relics, smooth carvings made not by alien hands, weapons too balanced for her people or any people she knew, and strange lines cut deep into the stone, words that whispered in a language none of them understood. One relic shone faintly, as if alive, when the night came and the stars filled the desert sky. It glowed with soft blue light, and Lyra felt her heart pound, for she knew this was no trick of dust and time. This was something left behind, something that did not belong to her world. Her friends grew afraid, and some begged her to stop. They said the elders were right. They said the ruins were cursed. But Lyra could not turn away. She felt that every step drew her closer to the truth. Every grain of sand was a voice whispering of a past that had been buried. When she lifted the relic in her hands, she felt it hum with power, as if it was remembering her touch. She looked at the stars and whispered the name humanity, and the relic seemed to answer with a faint pulse of light. The night wind moved around her, carrying the sound of the desert. Yet in that sound, she thought she heard a voice that did not belong to her people, a voice that came from far away, from deep in the past, or perhaps from beyond the stars. She could not be sure, But she knew one thing: she would never again laugh when the name of humanity was spoken. She would never again allow silence to bury the truth. For if they never existed, she asked again, who left these relics, who carved their stories, who dared to place their name across worlds and across time? And if they did exist, what happened to them, and where had they gone? In her heart, she felt the answer was not simple, and she knew the council would never give it to her. So she decided she would find it herself, even if it meant walking into darkness, even if it meant breaking the silence of her people, for she believed the relic spoke truth, and that truth would not remain buried forever. The desert stretched endless under a burning sun, and the winds carried grains of sand that whispered like old voices across the empty land, and Lyra walked with her small group of companions, their steps slow and heavy, yet their eyes filled with fire, because each of them carried the memory of the relic that glowed in her hand, and none could deny its strange power, even if their hearts feared what it might mean. They traveled for days, moving between broken cliffs and forgotten paths, until they reached a place where the ground dipped low and the sand fell into cracks that revealed black stone walls half buried and broken by time. Here the air was different, heavier and colder, as if the ruins themselves breathed with unseen life, and as the group drew near, their torches flickered though no wind touched the flame. Lyra led them down into the shadows, where carved doors lay fallen and broken into the earth. The walls held shapes of figures tall and strong, not alien, but something that looked closer to her people than any story had ever told. The figures held tools or weapons in their hands, and above their heads were lines of symbols, sharp and strange symbols that burned into her memory, though she could not read them. Her companions whispered in fear, saying they should turn back, saying these ruins belonged to cursed tribes long dead. Yet Lyra only pressed forward, her fingers brushing across the carvings and feeling warmth, as if the stone remembered the hand of its maker, and she whispered the word humanity, and again the air seemed to shift around her like a breath taken in secret. Within a chamber half buried by sand, they uncovered objects that did not match the work of her people: smooth metal cylinders, carved stones with marks too precise to be random, and strange weapons that felt balanced, as if shaped for hands like hers, yet stronger, sharper, more certain of purpose. One weapon hummed faintly when lifted, and it sent a chill through the group, and many begged her to leave it untouched. But Lyra refused. She felt the relics were speaking to her, telling her to dig deeper, to see more, to uncover what had been hidden. She ordered her friends to bring light, and together they cleared sand from a narrow stairway leading down beneath the ruins. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew, and the stones became darker, almost black, as if burned long ago by fire not of this world. At the bottom of the stair, they found a door sealed tight, with iron far stronger than anything her people could make. Lyra touched it, and the door responded with a faint glow, lines of light spreading across its surface like veins, and a sound low and deep echoed through the chamber, a sound like a heartbeat after endless silence. Her friends gasped, and one fell to his knees, whispering prayers for fear of spirits. But Lyra stood still, her hand pressed against the glowing lines, and her eyes locked upon the marks in the center, a circle with strange shapes inside it, shapes that seemed to form land and sea, though she did not yet understand that it was a map, and that the map was Earth itself. The door opened slowly, releasing a wave of air thick with the scent of stone and age, and inside they found a chamber filled with relics untouched by time, smooth carvings stacked neatly, walls painted with strange figures, stars drawn with bright colors, and symbols that repeated again and again: humanity, humanity, humanity. The sound of the word inside her mind was like thunder, and she felt her knees weaken. Yet she refused to fall, for she knew in that moment the relics were not the work of forgotten tribes, nor of her people. They belonged to a species that had walked the stars before them, a species that had left its mark on worlds beyond memory. One of her companions shouted that it was lies, that the council was right, and that these relics were tricks left by lost wanderers. But his voice shook with fear, and when he touched one of the relics, it glowed faint blue, and the chamber filled with a low hum that made every stone vibrate. The man screamed and dropped the object and ran into the shadows, never to return. The others stood frozen in silence, their eyes wide with terror. Yet Lyra only felt wonder. She lifted the glowing relic and held it high, and the hum became stronger and the walls of the chamber shimmered, as if the paintings themselves came alive, and she saw images of ships moving between stars, ships shaped for beings like her, yet stronger, larger, their steps echoing in endless corridors of light. She trembled at the sight, for it told her a truth greater than anything the council had ever spoken. Humanity had not been weak. Humanity had not been a myth. Humanity had walked the stars long before her people even dreamed of fire and stone, and now their relics spoke with the power of memory. Her friends fell back and begged her to leave the relics behind, but Lyra could not. Her heart was bound to them, and she felt as if they had waited for her across countless ages. She whispered humanity, and the relic pulsed with light, answering her like a voice that had crossed time itself. When they returned to the surface, the night sky stretched above them, filled with stars cold and sharp, and Lyra held the relic close, as if it were alive. Her friends spoke no words, for they feared the council would punish them for even touching such things, yet Lyra smiled, for she knew the truth could not be hidden forever. The relics were too strong, and the silence too heavy, and one day the truth would break free. As they camped in the desert, winds whispered through the dunes, and in that whisper Lyra thought she heard voices not of her people, voices that spoke of fire, of stone, of stars, and of struggle, voices that told her humanity had lived and had fought and had endured and perhaps had never truly left. She closed her eyes and swore she would bring the relics before the council. She would force them to see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears, and no laughter, no denial would silence the truth again, for the relics had spoken, and their voice was too strong to be buried. The desert did not give its secrets easily, yet Lyra refused to turn back. Her heart burned with the light of the relic, and her hands carried the weight of truth that no laughter could erase. She knew what she had found was only the beginning, and she felt the desert itself calling her deeper, calling her toward chambers still hidden beneath endless layers of dust and stone. Her companions followed with fear in their eyes, but also with a strange pull, for none of them could deny the hum of the relic or the glow that answered her voice. They set their camp near the ruins and began to dig, guided by whispers in the sand and cracks in the stone, until their hands bled and their bodies ached, yet none dared to stop, for the ground itself seemed alive with hidden power. Days passed before the earth gave way and revealed a great stairway, buried in shadow. It was wider than the last, and the stones that shaped it were black and smooth. Without age, though they had lain buried for countless generations, the steps led down into silence, and each step echoed like thunder in their hearts. And Lyra led the way, holding the relic like a lamp against the darkness. At the bottom, they found a vast chamber sealed tight, with walls that curved like the inside of a great dome. Strange carvings stretched across every surface, stars drawn in patterns unknown, planets marked with circles and lines. Yet one mark caught her eyes more than all the rest, a blue circle with shapes inside, shapes of land. And see, though none of her people had maps like this, she knew in her soul that it was not random. It was a world, it was Earth. Her companions gasped, yet none could speak, for the sight filled them with dread. If these marks were true, then the relics did not come from their world at all, but from another world far away across the stars, and the blue circle was proof that humanity had touched their land long before the council had even named their first cities. As they looked closer, they found carvings of figures with broad shoulders and steady eyes, figures holding weapons and tools unlike any the council had ever forged. These were not aliens from stories. These were beings closer to them than any other, and above the figures was carved a single word repeated across every wall: humanity, humanity, humanity. The sound of the word in her mind shook Lyra to her core. Her hands trembled, yet she stepped forward and touched the carvings, and the wall answered her with a faint hum like breath taken in secret. The symbols lit with pale blue light, and the chamber shivered as though it remembered voices long forgotten. Her companions cried out and begged her to stop, but she could not. Her heart was bound to the truth she had uncovered, and when the carvings glowed brighter, a section of the wall slid open, revealing another chamber inside the dome, a hidden place untouched by time. They entered slowly, the air cold and heavy, and before them stood rows of stone pillars, each one bearing relics carved with sharp lines and smooth metal plates that pulsed faintly with blue light. And at the center of the chamber was a great slab upon which lay a sphere no larger than her hand, but glowing with inner fire. Lyra stepped forward and lifted the sphere, And in that moment the chamber came alive, the relics pulsed with light, the pillars shook, and the ceiling echoed with low hums like voices in chorus. And then the sphere opened, projecting lines of light into the air, forming images of star ships, moving between them, and voices speaking in a language unknown, yet filled with power. Her companions fell to their knees, some praying, others screaming in terror. But Lyra stood tall, her eyes locked upon the vision, for she saw humans walking upon alien soil, carrying banners marked with the same circle of Earth. She saw them fighting wars against creatures her people had never known, and she saw them building towers that touched the clouds of foreign skies. The vision faded, yet the hum remained, and the sphere closed in her hand. She felt her body tremble, for she knew the truth was beyond denial. Humanity had not only existed, they had walked these very lands long ago. They had carved their mark upon her world and upon many others, and then they had vanished, leaving behind relics that could not be silenced. She turned to her companions and spoke, though her voice shook. She told them the Council could no longer hide the truth. The Council could no longer mock the name of humanity, for the relics had spoken, and the evidence lay not in myth, but in stone and in light. Yet fear held her friends. Some argued that if humanity had been so powerful, then their disappearance was proof of danger. They said perhaps the Council had hidden the truth to protect their people from knowledge too heavy to bear. Perhaps humanity had been destroyed by their own strength, and to speak their name was to invite doom upon them all. But Lyra refused to bend. She held the sphere close and declared that silence was a prison and that truth must be carried into the light. She promised she would stand before the Council with the relics in her hands and force them to see what had been buried for so long. That night, as they returned to the desert sky, the stars shone brighter than ever, and Lyra lay awake listening to the hum of the relics. She felt the ground beneath her pulse like a heartbeat. And in the wind, she heard whispers, voices that spoke of war, and survival, voices that carried the echo of humanity across endless time. She closed her eyes and asked herself, where had they gone? Had they fallen? Had they fled? Or had they hidden themselves, waiting for the right moment to return? And she felt fear mixed with hope, for if the relics were here, then perhaps more lay buried across other worlds. Perhaps humanity had not vanished at all. Perhaps they were watching. And as the desert winds sang around her, she swore that she would not rest until she uncovered every secret, every relic, and every truth. For humanity's place among the stars could no longer be denied, and she would be the one to bring their voice back into the light. The journey back to the Shining City was long and heavy, for Lyra carried not only the relics in her hands, but also the weight of truth upon her heart. Her companions walked in silence, their faces pale, their eyes filled with fear, for they knew that to show the relics to the Council was to invite danger and punishment. Yet Lyra pressed forward with fire in her steps. She could not allow silence to bury what she had seen. The grand hall of the Council was filled once again with voices that echoed like thunder against the walls. Great pillars rose into the air, glowing with soft golden light, and alien scholars sat upon high seats, their robes heavy, their eyes sharp with suspicion. As Lyra and her companions entered, all sound fell away. The hall turned silent, and every eye watched her, as if a storm had just walked through the doors. Lyra stepped into the center of the chamber and held out the relics, the sphere glowing faintly, the carvings shining with strange blue light. The Council murmured in confusion, and some laughed, calling it dust from forgotten ruins, nothing more, nothing less. But others grew still, for they could feel the hum in the air, the power that pulsed from the sphere like the slow, steady beat of a heart. One elder rose, his voice deep and commanding. He declared that humanity was a myth, and that Lyra was a fool blinded by broken stones and cursed lights. He said she had wasted her time, and that the Council had no patience for childish stories. Yet even as he spoke, the relic in her hand began to glow brighter, and the hum filled the hall, drowning out his words, until even he fell silent. The glow spread across the chamber, lines of blue light running along the floor, climbing up the pillars, reaching the high ceiling, until the entire hall shimmered with power. And upon the walls appeared images, ships soaring through stars, figures tall and strong, banners marked with the blue circle of Earth, and the word humanity carved in light so bright that none could look away. The hall shook with fear. Some scholars cried out, and others hid their faces, yet Lyra stood tall, her heart beating in rhythm, with the relic her voice strong, as she declared that the truth could no longer be denied, that humanity had walked among the stars long before the Council was even born, and that their relic spoke with a voice that could not be silenced. The elders argued, their words sharp and bitter. They called the relics dangerous. They called Lyra reckless. They claimed the visions were tricks left behind by dead tribes or by enemies seeking to poison their minds. But among the younger scholars, whispers spread, whispers that grew louder with every moment, whispers that asked, what if it was true? What if humanity was not a myth? What if they were the first? One elder, older than the rest, his skin lined with age, his eyes dark with memory, rose slowly from his seat. His voice trembled as he spoke, and he said he had seen these relics before, long ago on a battlefield forgotten by history. He said that once, long before silence had fallen, there had been war against beings who refused to fall, beings who fought in fire and in storm and never yielded. He said they called themselves human, and they were feared. The hall erupted in chaos, voices clashing like waves against stone. Some demanded silence, others demanded exile for Lyra. Some begged the council to burn the relics before the truth spread. Yet Lyra stood firm, her eyes locked upon the elder who had spoken. She asked him why the truth had been buried, why the council had hidden the memory of humanity, why their name had been erased from every record and every song. The elder looked away, his eyes filled with shadows. He muttered words too soft for all to hear, words of fear, words of shame. And then he fell silent, his hands shaking as if he carried a burden too heavy to bear, and the chamber grew quiet again, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Lyra raised the relic high once more, and the light flared brighter than ever before, filling every corner of the hall. With blue fire, the younger scholars stared wide-eyed, their hearts shaken, their minds opened, and the whispers grew louder until they became voices declaring that the council could no longer deny what had been shown. But the elders struck their hands upon the stone and shouted their commands. They declared that the relics were forbidden, that the records were false, that Lyra would be silenced before her madness spread. Two far guards stepped forward, their armor shining, their weapons raised. Yet the relics pulsed again with fierce light, and the guards froze, unable to move, as though held by unseen hands. The chamber shook, the air vibrated with power, and then the relics spoke, not with words of their people, but with a voice strange and strong, a human voice that echoed across the hall, saying, "We remember," saying, "We endured," saying, "We are not gone," and the sound filled every soul with fear and awe. When the voice faded, the hall fell in a silence deeper than before. Not even the elders could speak, for their words had turned to ash in their throats, and the relic in Lyra's hand pulsed once more before dimming back in a quiet light. The council dismissed her with anger and fear. They ordered her to leave. They said she would not return. They said the relics were a curse, but the young scholars followed her into the night, whispering promises, whispering hope, whispering truth. And Lyra knew the silence of the council could not last forever, for the truth had been seen, and once seen, it could not be buried again. As she stepped out into the dark city, the stars above her burned bright and sharp, and she felt the relic warm in her hand, as if alive, as if waiting for what would come next. She whispered humanity into the night, and the relic answered with a faint pulse of light, like a promise, like a heartbeat that would never fade. The city did not sleep that night, for whispers moved like fire across the streets, and the name humanity, once buried in silence, was now carried in secret by the young and the curious, while the council held their chambers shut and spoke only of punishment and fear. Yet Lyra did not rest. She walked with the relic close to her chest, and she knew that the truth lay deeper than what she had shown the council, for relics were proof, but words carved in stone were not enough. She needed record. She needed the hidden memory that the elders had locked away. Her companions followed, though their fear grew heavier with each step. They begged her to wait. They warned her that the council would hunt her if she dared to break the seals of the old libraries. But Lyra only looked to the stars above the city and whispered that silence was the true curse, and that secrets too long buried would rot the soul of every world until truth was freed. The forbidden archives lay beneath the old quarter of the city, where broken towers leaned against the night sky, and streets echoed with the ghosts of ages past. The council had sealed them with heavy iron gates and carved warnings across the stone gates that spoke of curses and madness. But Lyra felt no fear. She pressed the relic against the seal, and the gates trembled as though the lock itself remembered her touch. The iron gave way, and the doors opened into darkness, a darkness thick and heavy with dust and forgotten air. The group entered with lamps that flickered weakly against the walls, and the deeper they walked, the stronger the silence grew, until it felt like the very earth pressed against their chests. Rows upon rows of shelves filled the vast halls, each shelf heavy with scrolls and tablets and crystal records untouched for countless lifetimes. The companions stepped carefully, their hands shaking as they brushed away layers of dust and revealed marks in strange languages, yet among them all one word repeated again and again: humanity. Lyra lifted one of the crystal records, and light spilled from it, forming images of battles fought on worlds of fire, oceans of blackwater, skies filled with storms. And among the chaos figures stood tall, unyielding human figures who fought with weapons that blazed like suns and eyes that held no fear. She saw them push back armies of creatures unknown. She saw them stand against storms that shattered mountains, and in every vision the humans endured. Her breath caught, for the records were not songs or myths. They were history. They were memory locked away by the council because the truth was too heavy for their rule to carry. She placed the record down and reached for another, and this one told of worlds seeded with fire and stone where no life should survive. Yet humans had walked upon them, building shelters, raising fires, growing food. Where nothing should grow, the words called them deathworlders, beings forged in struggle. Who could endure what no other could? Her companions cried out in disbelief, some covering their faces in fear, yet others leaned closer, drawn to the stories, as if their own hearts remembered something hidden. The council had spoken of myths, but here in the silence of the archives lay a truth carved so deep it could not be erased. Lyra pressed on deeper into the library until she reached a chamber sealed with runes darker than night. She placed the relic against the door, and the runes burned blue, opening with a sound like thunder. And inside, she found a single tablet resting upon a pedestal, its surface smooth and glowing with faint light. She reached for it, and words filled her mind, not spoken, not written, but carried like a whisper from the past. The words told of war between the Council and humanity long ago, a war the Council had sworn to erase from memory, a war where humans stood unbroken, even when outnumbered, even when their worlds burned. The tablet spoke of fear that spread through the Council, fear that if humanity was remembered, their spirit would rise again, and the galaxy would tremble once more. And so the Council buried their name, erased their records, and sealed their relics away in silence. Lyra fell to her knees as the weight of the truth filled her heart. She saw now why the elders had mocked her, why they had called her foolish, why they had feared her relics, for they carried the voice of a species the Council had once tried to destroy, but could never truly erase. Her companions looked to her, their voices trembling as they asked if humanity was gone forever, if their strength had been broken in the old war. Yet the relic pulsed in her hands, and she heard the faint echo of a voice, not gone, not broken, but waiting, and she knew in her heart that the truth was more than history, it was a promise. She lifted the tablet and declared to her companions that silence had ruled too long, that the truth would be carried into the light. Even if the Council tried to bury it again, she swore that the voice of humanity would rise, and that every world would know what had been hidden for too many ages. The ground beneath them shook as if the archives themselves had heard her oath. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the lamps flickered with fear. Yet Lyra felt no fear. She felt only fire within her chest, and the relic burned brighter than ever before, its hum filling the chamber like a living heartbeat. Her companions swore loyalty, some with tears in their eyes, some with trembling hands, yet all with voices that carried the same fire. They would follow her, they would guard the relics, they would spread the truth, even if the Council cast them into exile, for they knew now that humanity was not a myth, not a tale for children, but a force that had once shaped the stars and might yet rise again. As they left the archives, the night air struck them cold, but the stars above seemed closer, brighter, sharper, as if listening to the words she carried in her heart, and she whispered humanity into the night sky. The relic answered with a pulse of light, and the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The desert wind carried their footsteps as Lyra and her companions returned from the forbidden archives, each of them changed by the weight of what they had seen. Their voices trembled, their eyes burned with questions, and their hearts beat with fear, and wonder for the truth was no longer hidden. It walked with them. It pulsed in the relic. It whispered in the silence between every breath. They made camp upon the edge of the ruined city, where broken towers clawed at the sky and shadows stretched across the sand. And as the night fell, Lyra placed the relic upon the ground, and the soft blue glow spread across the stones. Her companions gathered close, too afraid to look away, too afraid to be alone, for the relic was alive, and its hum carried through the air like the sound of distant thunder. Lyra whispered humanity, and the glow answered stronger, brighter, filling the night with light. And in that moment the relic stirred and opened with lines of fire pouring into the air, shaping visions that danced above their heads, visions so clear that the stars themselves seemed to bow before them. They saw a battlefield beneath a sky of fire, where human warriors stood unbroken against enemies that towered above them, claws and teeth tearing, yet never enough to break the line of human fighters who bled, yet rose again, who fell, yet still struck back. The vision carried their screams and their songs of defiance, and the companions trembled, for the voices sounded real, as if they were here beside them. The vision shifted and showed ships vast and bright, moving between stars, their engines glowing like suns, their banners marked with a blue circle of Earth fluttering in lightless space. They carried humans to worlds untouched, and strange worlds of ice and shadow, worlds of fire and storm. And yet everywhere they went, they endured, they built, they fought, they rose. The vision shifted once more, and a single voice spoke in a language none of them knew, yet each of them felt the meaning in their hearts. The voice said, "We remember." The voice said, "We endure." The voice said, "We are not gone." And the words wrapped around their souls like fire and left them breathless. When the vision ended, silence fell heavy upon the camp. The relic dimmed, but its hum did not fade. It beat steady like a heart alive and awake, and Lyra lifted it in her hands, her eyes wide, her voice low, as she asked, "What if humanity never left? What if they are waiting? What if they are closer than we think?" Her companions shook their heads, some with fear, some with awe. One said, "If they are still here, why do they not reveal themselves?" Another said, "Perhaps they sleep hidden until the time is right." And another said, "Perhaps they watch us, waiting to see if we are worthy to know them again." The night stretched long, and Lyra did not sleep. She sat with the relic upon her lap and listened to its hum, and in that sound she felt voices, voices layered upon voices, countless and endless, as if 1,000 souls whispered across time. They told of battles fought, they told of sacrifices made, they told of a promise to endure until the stars themselves faded. When the sun rose the next morning, they began their journey once more, not toward the city, not toward the council, but deeper into the wild lands beyond, where ruins older than memory still lay untouched. Lyra followed the pull of the relic, for she felt it was guiding her step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat, and her companions followed, though fear clung to their shadows. They reached cliffs of black stone carved with lines too sharp to be made by wind and water, and within those cliffs a cavern yawned wide, its mouth dark and silent. The relic pulsed brighter as they approached, and Lyra knew that within lay something greater, something that would carry the truth beyond all doubt. Inside the cavern, the walls shimmered faintly, though no torch touched them, and as they walked deeper, the floor smoothed until it felt less like stone and more like metal. Her companions grew restless, their whispers echoing loud against the silence, but Lyra pressed forward, her eyes fixed upon the glow of the relic in her hands. At the heart of the cavern stood a great arch covered in strange marks, lines that curved like rivers, stars drawn in patterns unknown, and at the center of the arch lay a stone table upon which rested another relic larger than the first, its surface cracked, yet glowing faintly as though waiting. Lyra placed her relic beside it, and at once the cavern shook with power, the walls blazed with light, the arch burned bright, and the second relic opened, spilling waves of fire and shadow into the air, forming visions greater than any before. They saw humanity not in fragments, but in fullness, a species spread across countless worlds, rising in storm and in flame, shaping mountains and rivers, carving towers into skies. They saw them clash with enemies beyond number, and yet never breaking, never falling. There will stronger than steel, their spirit brighter than suns. The visions carried songs and languages none of them knew, yet each note struck their hearts with meaning, songs of sorrow, songs of triumph, songs of defiance. And in those songs was a single truth: humanity had not been erased, humanity had not been forgotten, humanity had endured. The companions wept, some in fear, some in wonder, for they realized the council had not only buried history, they had buried hope. They had taken from their people the memory of what strength could be, and in doing so they had chained every world to silence. Lyra lifted both relics, her arms trembling, yet her voice strong, and she declared that the echoes of humanity would not fade, that the truth was alive, and that no council, no elder, no silence could stop what had now been awakened. She swore she would carry the relics before the stars themselves if needed, and she would speak the truth until every world heard it. The cavern roared with light, as if answering her oath, and the relics pulsed in her hands together, their hum rising like thunder, like the beat of countless hearts across time. Her companions bowed, their heads some in fear, some in devotion, and they knew their lives could never return to what they had been before. As they left the cavern, the sky stretched endless and bright, the stars sharp against the morning light, and the relics glowed softly, as if content, as if watching, and Lyra whispered humanity into the air, and in her heart she heard the answer: we are here, we endure, we are not gone. The city was restless as the suns rose above its towers, for whispers had grown into voices, and voices had grown into arguments. And though the council tried to silence them, the memory of the relics had already slipped beyond their reach. Lyra walked at the head of her companions, the relics held close to her chest, glowing faintly with each step she took, and the people turned their heads to watch, some with fear, some with awe, and some with hope. The grand hall of the council loomed before them, its gates closed, its guards tense. Yet when Lyra approached, the relics pulsed, and the gates trembled, as though unwilling to stand against the truth. The guards hesitated, their hands upon their weapons, but none moved forward, for the hum of the relic filled their hearts with dread, and none could bring themselves to strike against what felt alive. Inside the council chamber, the elders waited, their robes heavy, their eyes dark with fury. They shouted that Lyra had broken sacred law, that she had entered forbidden places, that she had spread poison among the people. They demanded her silence, they demanded her relics. Yet Lyra stepped into the center of the hall, her voice steady, her heart strong, and she raised the relics high for all to see. The chamber shook with light, the walls blazing with visions that poured from the relics, visions of humans walking upon alien worlds, visions of their banners marked with the blue circle of earth, visions of battles where they stood against endless enemies and still endured. The council could not look away. The young scholars gasped, the guards trembled, and the voices of the people outside the hall grew louder, pressing against the walls like waves against stone. Lyra spoke with fire in her words. She told them that silence had ruled too long, that truth had been buried by fear, and that the relics carried the voice of a people who refused to be forgotten. She declared that humanity was real, that they had walked among the stars, and that their name could no longer be mocked or erased. The elders shouted in anger, calling her a liar, calling the relics dangerous tools of deception. But their words sounded hollow against the roar of truth, for the relics pulsed again, and a voice not her own filled the chamber, a human voice strong and clear, saying, we remember, saying we endure, saying we are not gone. The sound silenced every tongue and froze every hand, for it carried power no council could deny. One elder collapsed to his knees, his hands shaking as he whispered that long ago he had seen humans upon a battlefield, and that their eyes burned with fire brighter than suns. He confessed that the council had hidden the truth out of fear, out of shame, out of weakness, and his words spread like fire through the chamber until silence fell heavy once more. Then the relics flared brighter than ever before, projecting a final vision into the air above the council, a vision of countless stars marked with the circle of Earth, one after another across the galaxy, each shining like a beacon, each whispering with the same voice, humanity, humanity, humanity. The people gasped, the young scholars cried out, and even the elders could not deny what burned before their eyes. The chamber doors burst open as the voices of the crowd outside pushed through, and they saw the vision with their own eyes. They fell to their knees, some weeping, some shouting with joy, some trembling in terror. But none could deny the truth any longer. Humanity was real, humanity had endured, and humanity's voice had returned. Lyra stood tall in the center, her hands trembling from the weight of the relics. Yet her heart unbroken, she declared that the silence was over, that the council could no longer bury what had been shown, that the galaxy must face the truth and prepare for what might come. For if relics still glowed, if voices still spoke, then perhaps humanity itself still lived, perhaps they were waiting to rise once more. The people cheered, the sound like thunder filling the hall, shaking the very pillars of the council. And the elders sat pale, their power crumbling before their eyes, for no lie could stand against the roar of truth, no silence could bury the echo of voices that refused to fade. The relics pulsed one final time, and then a figure formed in light, standing above the chamber, a human figure, tall and strong, eyes burning with fire, hair dark as night, and voice sharp as steel. The figure looked upon them all, and spoke in words that pierced their souls. You denied us, but we never left. You buried us, but we endured. You forgot us, but we remember. And now you must choose. Will you walk in silence, or will you walk in truth? The vision faded, yet the weight of the words remained, pressing upon every heart and every mind, and none could escape it, for the truth had been spoken, and it could not be erased again. That night the city burned, not with fire, but with voices, voices that rose from every street, every tower, every home, voices that carried the name humanity like a song long forgotten and now remembered. Once more the council tried to hide in their chambers, but the people no longer listened, for the relics had spoken, and the relics could not be silenced. Lyra stood upon the highest tower, the relics glowing beside her, and she looked to the stars, her voice soft yet steady, as she whispered humanity into the night sky, and the relic answered with a pulse of light. And in that light, she felt hope, she felt fear, and she felt certainty that this was only the beginning, that echoes of the past were not echoes alone, but promises waiting to be fulfilled. The stars seemed brighter, sharper, alive with unseen fire, and she wondered if humanity watched from beyond, if they listened, if they waited, and her heart told her they did, for truth could be buried, but never destroyed, and voices could be silenced, but never erased, and if relics still glowed, then one day the hands that made them might return. And so the silence was broken, the council undone, the people awakened, and the galaxy itself trembling with the knowledge that humanity had walked among the stars and might yet walk again.